Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our broadcast entitled Let's Talk About History, the Germans of Southwestern Michigan. My name is Michael Hurd, and I'm the owner of Lineage Independent Publishing in Marriottsville, Maryland, quite a distance away from Berrien County, Michigan, about 600 miles or so. And with me today is Freddy Krieger, a historian and genealogist who has done deep dives into St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Stevensville and St. Matthew's Lutheran Church in Benton Harbor, Michigan. So, Freddie, welcome to the broadcast, and let's see where this goes.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope that's something I have to offer enriches others' pursuits for either family history or perhaps Lutheran Church history.
That's how we met, was actually doing the video presentations for actually it's before that, but the video presentations for St. Paul's 125th, and then the history of St. Matthew's after they merged with Good Shepherd to become Beautiful Savior Lutheran Church, right?
Yeah, it's correct, and we certainly here in Berrien County have to thank you for the technical expertise to do all the editing for the 125th anniversary of St. Paul's Stevensville presentations, and also the history of the founders of St. Matthew's Benton Harbor presentations. I get so caught up in the presenting that my technical abilities get put into second, third, and fourth place, and you sure played a role making them watchable and something that people could learn from. So we certainly thank you for that. And many people here thank you for it.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a pleasure. It was actually fun to do. It was a diversion from writing and editing. So, but anyway, let's talk a little bit about both of our backgrounds. I know yours is pretty diverse, and if you wouldn't mind, who is Freddy Krieger, and why should we care? I think we had some technical difficulties here. While we're waiting for Freddie's internet connection to stabilize, I'll talk about my background then. I spent 14 years in the United States Air Force. I got out of the Air Force and went to the Department of Defense as a civilian employee, and retired in 2018. So, during that whole time, I spent a lot of time writing, editing. Federal government writing is a lot different than writing for fun and pleasure. And, I had a lot of bad habits to unlearn when I first started writing novels, in part pushed by my deceased son's research work into family history. He found out things like my grandmother being a domestic during the Depression, some newspaper clippings, my dad's hobbies in the 1940s and 50s, even going back a little bit farther than that. And that kind of keyed me into starting to research. What happened was the research took me to the point where I was able to say, okay, I've got enough intersect points between my family tree and events in history that I could really craft some fictional accounts of my family's involvement in history. I started off doing a book with 13 vignettes, and then each of those vignettes is being turned into a full-length book. And the one that I have, one of the ones I'm proudest of, because it's based in Southwestern Michigan, the cover of which should be in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, is the Germans Lineage Series Book 6, I believe. So anyway, Freddie, now that our technical difficulties are resolved, I'll let you talk about yourself.
Oh, well, not much to say. I grew up in Stevensville, Michigan, in Berrien County, Michigan, known as the highest concentration of Germans from Volhynia, Russia, most of whom emigrated to Berrien County in the early 1890s, 1893 and following. Grew up in a plumbing family. Attended St. Paul's Lutheran School in Stevensville, and then Michigan Lutheran High School in St. Joseph. Then I was a plumber for a year working for my dad, and poof, went away to Wisconsin to study to be a pastor. Spent about, say 20 years in the pastoral ministry in Alaska, Arizona, and then a teaching stint at a high school in Minnesota. And then I got sick. And when I got sick, I had to retire from that. So what else did I know how to do but plumbing? So I went back into the plumbing business, moved back to Berrien County, took over my father's business in Berrien County. And then when the economy hit bad in 2010, I ended up working armed security at a local nuclear power plant for the last career. So if the definition of retired means getting tired again, I got tired again a total of 1, 2, 3 times. And that brings me to history. You've got a map of Volhynia there. I would come home when I was in Alaska and Arizona. I would travel to summer school for 3 weeks each summer at the seminary, and for 3 weeks of intense studies. And during the weekends, I would come home. One weekend when I came home, I went to the Christoph Krieger reunion like we always did. And I just happened, I believe this was 1986. I asked the oldest guy there, Wotrick was his name. I said, so where in Germany did we come from? And he looked at me like I had potatoes growing out of my ears. He said, my young man, we didn't come from Germany. We came from Volhynia, Russia. That opened my whole mind to an alternative form of family history I never knew existed. Went back to school and I saw bookshelves in the library dedicated to German Volhynian history. So 1986 is when I started my interest in this, and it's been intensified more lately after I retired for the third time, where now I have time to intensely study family history, mine and many other families as well. And then that also links into church history, which gets us into the Germans, not only from Volhynia, but Germans who never made it to Volhynia, but came straight from Pomerania up in the north. You see Gdansk on the map there. Many Berrien County Germans came in the 1850s, 40s, 50s and 60s straight from Pomerania over to Berrien County. Our Germans just happened to come from Volhynia. So that's a short account of me and how I got into this and eventually ended up meeting you.
I mean, it is a lot of fun to do these deep dives, because each of us are looking for different things in our research, and you're looking for exact facts, right?
Yes, all of my research is historically based and seeking out pure history, and so that's one branch of historical research. But I understand that you undertake historical research for quite a different purpose, no less formidable, but quite a different purpose.
Yeah, what I do is I research more thematic, finding themes and living conditions during certain periods in history that I craft my novels around. And with the Germans in particular. The concept that I used there was trying to find out what the conditions might have been like in Volhynia, how they managed to find their way to Berrien County, Michigan, and then what happened to them after they got there. So I wasn't so concerned about all the begats and begots, because let's face it, I mean, our family tree reads like the first chapter of Matthew in the Bible, going back that many years. So what I was looking for was ways I could craft a fictional story that was still accurate for the period I was writing about. And in the case of the Germans, I took that back to the 1890s when the Fryer family left Volhynia by way of Poland onto Hamburg and then across into coming to America. So it was a very, very interesting proposition. Sometimes I would spend more time researching than I would actually writing book.
Now, what you mentioned is very important, and I want to put a plug in for you here with your book that you had on the screen. My family, our family had no camera, even in the years in Berrien County. No family, very few, if any, family pictures. I have no oral history handed down. I I have cold, hard birth, marriage, and death records. Cold, hard data. I have no
Mhm.
color. The one thing that I want to mention to our listeners about Michael's book, and I'd encourage you to get it. One thing that did for me for effect is it it gave color to the painting. I have the nuts and bolts, the dates, the who's, the whens, the wheres. I don't so much have the whys or the hows or the personal history. I don't have the experiences, and so if you meld your pursuits and mine together, it really gives me a little more of a complete picture of what it was like. So I want to thank you for that book, and I encourage anybody who is working with only data, historical data, like I am. It's a good read, and it's well worth your exploration.
No, thank you for the vote of confidence there. I mean, as an author, I mean that's nice to hear, knowing that somebody has actually read the book and can provide that commentary that it was thematically accurate and provided a depth of experience that you can't just get from all the begats and begots.
No, I know, and I have much. Imagine an Indiana Jones movie without people in it, and all you're doing is watching him discover things, and you admire what he discovered, and you might study what he discovered, but without people and their experiences surrounding the plot, there's not too many people who would buy that, go to pay to watch that movie. What your book has done for me is put the experiences in, and I do learn from hearing the oral accounts that have passed down from generation to generation from other families. That's a topic in and of itself, because much oral history passed down from family to family, spoken fondly of at family reunions, gets corrupted over a period of years,
Mm-hmm.
and at a certain point becomes undependable history. But it does add color to it, but your book has done that for me, and I thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, when you're talking about the oral history aspect of that, one of my great uncles, my grandfather's brother, Robert Fryer, was a teacher in one of the county school systems over near Detroit. He started off at the Hull School in Benton Harbor and eventually ended up, as a department head over in Detroit. He took a lot of the family history back in the 1960s and wrote it down based on oral interviews with my great grandmother, Caroline Ohm Fryer, who owned the farm that became the Blossom Trails Golf Course back in the late 1950s. And he worked with my aunt, Leona Fryer Peters, my great aunt, Leona Fryer Peters, to codify all that stuff and do their best to put the family tree together as it existed through about 1975 or 80. So, I've used that hard copy, which is in a nicely bound folder, to fill out some of the information that keyed me for discussion points in the book. Finding names of aunts and uncles, for example. The fact that one of the Fryer daughters, Eleanor Fryer, married Leslie Potter, who became a colonel in the United States Army. Right, and he's buried in Arlington National Cemetery, and I've gone to visit his grave once upon a time. But the thing that's most interesting is that if you look at the Germans in Southwestern Michigan, they pretty much stuck to themselves in the early years because of the language difficulties. I think this is a theory on my part, and that's why you had like the Kazishkis marrying into the Klugs and the Friars marrying into, the Klugs as well. There was that commonality of origin that resulted in some romantic entanglements through about the early 1930s. I mean, what do you think about that theory?
As you were going through that, three things popped out at me. First of all, in studying congregational history, going back to 1896, 1898, 1899, very few people moved away from the area. I mean, out of state. From St. Matthews, only two families moved out of state, one to North Dakota, one to South Dakota. And they moved to relation who also had previously come from Pomerania. So people stayed close to home when they settled in Berrien County. Most normally, in the case of the outlying areas, Sodus, Bridgman, Stevensville, Coloma, they settled on a farm. Now, Benton Harbor is a different critter. St. Joe's a different critter because their commerce was more factory and manufacturing based. But yet, those people, if they wanted to work until they could buy a farm, they did so. If they wanted to stay and participate in the commerce of that larger city, they did so. It brings us to an interesting topic, and I want to dovetail, not diverge, but one question many people always ask is, where did these people meet their spouses? Where did they meet each other? And I've come up with two answers which go back to the fact that these people stayed together. They found a spouse from a neighboring farm or a farm not far away, or they found a spouse at their local Lutheran church. In some instances, it went beyond Lutheranism. For instance, Clay Street Baptist Church in Benton Harbor, German Volinians there would have married very often within the church. So language did keep them together, but that died out as the census shows us that people spoke English as you get to the first decade past the turn of the century. Mm-hmm. But they were bound by their farm life, which was their neighborhood, their congregational life, and then language would probably be a minor thing that died out after a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because one of the things that I remember my grandparents telling me, Hertha Klug Friar and Albert Friar, was that when they were first married and had my uncle, my mom, and my aunt, was that they would occasionally lapse back into German if they didn't want the kids to know what they were talking about.
Yeah, I remember that from way back in my day, rarely, but that did happen. As German died out, German was a vestige of the old people. Mm-hmm. Now your more recent Germans to Berrien County post World War II, they hung on to German in the home and even in their churches much longer than the Volinian or Pomeranian Germans did. But German was fresh to them. They were married and they grew up with German in their children. I went to grade school with children who spoke German in their home. As that died out, and you go back to the early 1900s, sooner or later, the use of German in the home died out, but it was still continued in the churches. Mm-hmm. Because every church sometimes had a rough time going from German to English. And all Lutheran churches I know of, and some German Baptist churches, they retain a German service alongside of or in between English services. Mm-hmm. So language did bind the culture and to a sense preserved it, but that died out after a while, yet the culture remained.
Right. Right.
What would be the area of study? Not a historian, but a sociologist would have a field day with that topic. Why did German culture, as people would know it, why did that continue, even though all the the language dropped off after a while. So
I mean,
interesting topic.
you could probably talk for hours about that, but I know that the Trinity in St. Joe, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod congregation, and St. Matthew's in Benton Harbor, a Wisconsin Synod congregation, had German services through probably the late 1970s.
Oh yeah, yeah, 19. Yeah, in the case of St. Matthew's, I know into 1980. Yeah, Stephenville, St. Paul's. I remember going to German service with my dad. We didn't speak German in the home, but he thought it was good that I was exposed to it. That was in the late 80s. That finally there were fewer and fewer old Germans who worshipped in that language. Their children did not, and so
Right.
like all good things, they come to an end, and that's how the change of language. The change of language occurred, but yet the culture lived on. I would brings up another topic, just to put it on the floor, is the more I study, the more I realize we are because of what our ancestors endured. Now think about that. We are because of what our ancestors endured. I think, at least speaking for Volhynian Germans and also Pomerania Germans, our ancestors endured things that we today will never, no matter what the conditions governmentally, socially, economically, we will not endure what they had to endure. And I think that made us, I'll call ourselves Volhynian, that made us a hardy breed, because we are due to what they endured.
I think I would agree with that. I mean, just some of the things that I remember, my grandparents talking about working hard and basically knowing what hard work was. I mean, we started working on the farm when I was 10, 11 years old. We moved away from Berrien County in December of 1969, but I still went back during the summers between 1970 and 73, 74, when my parents split up, and worked on the farms in Coloma, Sodus, doing all kinds of things, from picking strawberries to packing tomatoes to picking peaches and plums.
If there's three things we could cite from that I believe Volhynian Germans today exhibit that came from that, we learned, is it nature or nurture? Probably nurture. We inherited, however, a sense of we're industrious. We have a sense of survivability regardless of the circumstances. And we have a sense of loyalty, whether it be loyalty to neighborhood, loyalty to family, in spite of the distances as we've dispersed, loyalty to congregational life, loyalty to our school. We have a sense of loyalty as well as industriousness and hard work. I think it all comes from, I think of what they endured, Prussia and Napoleon and the Polish uprisings of the 1860s. And like I said, my family got kicked out of 3 different countries, if you want to put it that way. We learned a sense of survivability, which we needed to be industrious in order to survive the circumstances. So, so I'll end with where I began: is we are today because of what they endured back then. I'm convinced.
Oh, I have no doubt. I mean, you look at the situation, in like 1900, 1901, right? The family legend on the Fryer side was that they had a land grant from somewhere back between there and back as far as 1763. I don't know exactly when, and this is family legend, but there was also an exemption from military conscription in that package of paperwork. Well, Gottlieb Fryer lost that paper, and tensions were heating up between Russia and Japan in 1900 or so, resulting in war in 1904, 1905. And as a result, they were not only going to have their land confiscated, but they were also going to have to start paying taxes, start assimilating into being Russified, if you will, in that area, and then basically losing their German identity. So what they did was they packed up, basically up sticks, took every possession that they had, and headed towards Poland. All right. Now, crossing the border into Poland was no easy task because there was some financial compensation expected, for people to cross the border, and their luggage made it across the border, but they didn't. But the legend has it was that they were told to, go a few miles south, find this tree, cross the river, and you'll be home free in Poland, and then come back up to this town. And then from there, they went on to Bremerhaven, Germany, and got on a ship to come across the Atlantic. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So, but is there anything you want to add to that chain of events from your family's perspective?
Just a distinction that I draw through studying various families. I see a distinction. Berrien County Volinians, the majority of them came from 1892, the earliest I could find, the Vilwalk family, on through about 1900. Then the German Volinians after that had to endure circumstances that the previous migrants escaped from. There were various uprisings, the movement toward Russification, the threat of military conscription. The early Volinian German migrants, I like to think they could hear the war drums beating on the horizon. The war didn't occur, the Great War didn't occur till 1914, but things were unsettled to the point that it was uncertain. We got to get out of here because we've got the opportunity now. Now, your relatives almost stayed too long. Think about the families who stayed longer. They had to endure World War I. That meant, was it that war after which many were deported to Siberia, or was that World War II?
I don't honestly remember. I would guess it was probably World War II. Because when Hitler came to power in 1933 or so, he was all in favor of reassimilating the ethnic Germans from the former Russian republics.
Yeah, those people, they were a threat to Germany because they lived in Russia. They were a threat to Russia because they were ethnic Germans.
Yes.
Many got out, but for those who didn't, they had to endure World War II. And then the deportations, the Holodomor, the starving. So I see three different groups: the early migration up to 1899, 1900, and then from 1900 up through the wars, and then finally after World War II. I see those as different historical epochs.
Right.
And many people's families came from one of those epochs or the one before that if they were from Pomerania.
Right. Well, like we had the Herman Klug family that ended up in Sodus. They emigrated in 1895, I think it was.
Yeah.
While the Friars waited 6 more years and didn't make the crossing until 1901. Like you said, almost too late.
That's correct. That's the key. Almost too late, because when you hear the accounts of the historical accounts of after that, it was not pleasant for those who lived in Volhynia. They got caught in the middle of 2, sometimes 3 governmental entities, and many of them, there are many haunting stories. Let's just put it at that.
So I'm going to take a short break in our discussion here. We have one person watching us right now, and I'd like to give them an opportunity to let us know who they are in the chat box if they could, and let us know where they're from. And then we can see what our viewer might be interested in discussing. Oh, it shows me as viewing myself. That's interesting.
Okay. While this may be one of those three people, I want to mention three people that have, well, really four, three people that have been the most benefit to my study, and one of them might be listening in or watching on the YouTube channel or another resource. First of all, Irene Klug-Gerwig, who's down in Iowa, from her family's from Glendora, south of Baroda, a diligent family history researcher. She has benefited me a lot. In fact, things I don't know, I'll ask her, and she'll keep me going. I want to mention Helen Gillespie from Ottawa, Canada. She's highly instrumental in the SGGEE organization, which covers the history of Eastern Europe. She's the one I depend on for history. And I want to mention Gordon Shermer down in South Bend. Grew up in Fairplain near Benton Harbor. Ended up being a teacher in South Bend, Indiana. I didn't meet him until earlier this year. But when I met him, he knew more about my Krieger family than I did. And but he's got the benefit of knowing how to know his way around, navigate the Polish records. He knows he's very conversant at identifying things in the German records. He's been the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain that I was always hoping to meet. So, and then the fourth one, of course, is you with the technical advice and technology that you helped with the presentation. So, and I see that Helen Gillespie just joined in. So, Helen, if you missed it, I just gave you a lot of credit. So. I do want to mention in that regard too. I did mention Helen. She's highly involved in SGGEE. If people would ask me, what's your number one resource that you use for family history research, it would have to be the SGGEE database, which a searchable database. It's free. You can get it as a public access. The sggee.org. If anybody's interested in their family history from Volhynia, spend some time there. By some simple searches, you'll find family members, their births, their baptisms, or their marriages or deaths. I want to credit SGG as my number one resource. Well worth the $40 Canadian dollar membership each year, but they do have a free component. So if anybody's budding out into their family research, that'd be the number one place to go.
Okay, let me stop sharing. Helen has a comment that she, there we go.
Okay, so deported to Siberia in 1915. Thank you for that. And he left. Yeah. And she draws the distinction there as to when the Siberian deportation took place. Those who returned lived to tell about it. From what I understand, those many did not return, according to my understanding of that sad part of history.
And Helen, thank you very much for letting us know you've been watching since the beginning. So that's a good thing. And she also just posted information that the SGGEE's convention is August 17th to 18th, and it's free.
Yeah.
Helen, is that an online convention or is it an in-person?
I happen to know that is online.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you, Fred.
But I believe you could, Helen will clarify. I don't believe you have to. Helen, do you need to be a member to partake in the presentations? They must have 40, 50, 60 different presentations that I plan on tuning in myself.
Mhm. Okay, so let's back up to the concept of records for a few minutes. Remember back, what was it, last year sometime, we worked on cataloging St. Matthew's records, or births, marriages, baptisms, confirmations, and organizing them in some fashion. What I found was interesting through that process was that I noticed a shift in the language, starting about 1940-ish. We were talking about the language change from German to English, and you started seeing the change there. And it was just interesting to see, like, right after World War II, the number of marriages and births skyrocketed. Right after World War I, marriages and births skyrocketed. The guys coming home from war. So, but anyway, Helen answered the question about the SGGEE, that it's a virtual convention, and that it's a good option to join the SGGEE, but not entirely necessary.
Yes. What I do want to credit you also. When I became the archivist of the St. Matthew Benton Harbor historical documents, I took digital images of all of the pastoral acts, and then I offered them. I had permission from the church to offer them online, and then Michael, you took them and categorized them in my Google Drive files according to year, and that really was a benefit, because now instead of going through 800 scans, 800 images, all I have to do is identify what year I'm looking for, marriages, boom. And I get a lot of people who contact me as an archivist. Oh, do you have a record of my aunt or my great aunt's confirmation in 1912? Well, I could do that from my lazy chair, my easy chair, my lazy boy, and much of that is thanks to you for categorizing it, the technology aspect of that. That gets us into another topic, is church records. Not all churches are all that informed that if their church records were digitized and made available, it would make family history study much easier. I've tried to get permission for local church records in Berrien County, and then make those images available with the permission of the congregation. But if anybody watches this now or later, that's a member of a church of a German background of some kind, identify whether those records can be put online. It really benefits family researchers like you and I are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good plug for digitizing records, because like we've talked about some of our sources, things like newspaper records, right? The Herald Palladium has got is through newspapers.com, is easily searchable, and I found a lot of family information on my father's side just from searching through Herald Palladium records. We've got other things like findagrave.org. That's another good one. You want to find where people are buried, and sometimes that'll have jumping off points to obituaries, which will have jumping off points to marriage records and all that stuff. Berrien County's land records are easily accessible online. Now, they'll be redacted. They'll just put a big black block over a very critical piece of information, but you can at least find out that on February 30th of 1933, Albert Fryer bought X number of acres of land from so-and-so for a price of redacted.
Yeah. They usually leave the location unredacted, which does benefit us. The other things I've known when I'm helping people locate I usually use the 1903 plat map, because face it, my interest ends in 1903. But I'm able to use the detail of the description to locate it on the plat map to inform them where the property was where their family bought a farm.
Mhm.
So the most of the time in the land records that is not redacted, which has been a real benefit. That for Berrien County history, the local newspaper archives, that's the best 1995 per 6 months that I spend, and I'm cheap as ever. I don't do ancestry.com because it's too expensive for me. I'm tight. I'm a German. But my 3 month complimentary subscription for $1 did pay off big time benefits. I do note Helen just noted that Coloma Public Library has the Water Vliet and Coloma newspapers. The Coloma newspaper is an excellent searchable newspaper, also online for free, and that's a good resource for anybody whose ancestors lived out toward Bainbridge Township. Bainbridge Township would have been connected with the news from Watervliet and Coloma. And by the way, back then, if you were a farmer and you were picking peaches, you fell off a ladder and broke your arm, that would be in the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
So people who want to know about their family history will benefit from searching the local newspaper archives, regardless of where they lived. If they lived in North Dakota, find out what newspaper that is. Newspaper.com could get you access to that.
Yeah, Helen was talking about her family's arrival in Berrien County. Her great-great-grandparents and 2 sons and families arrived in 1902 to 1904. Curious where they came from, Helen, whether it was from Volhynia or one of the other enclaves. But it's interesting. We've all got some connection to people having to make a crossing from Northern Europe to the United States. All right, well, let's talk about the modality of that crossing for a few minutes.
How long did it take? What were the conditions? Were there any sad accounts? Was it easy? Were there any births on the ship? Anybody die on the ship? Anything you could relate on that?
Well, the picture that I just put up on the screen is a representative sample of what the steamers looked like back then that came across. They were generally underpowered, right? They were usually less than 600 feet long, and they were capable of transporting anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 people in addition to the crew. All right, now let's look at that for a minute. That's usually about 4 or 5 decks tops. All right, a modern cruise ship, even the smallest ones, are 9 or 10 decks. All right, capable of handling 2,000 people in comfort with private bathrooms. All right, but the steerage class in these steamers that came across were generally bunkhouse accommodations. With the bunks sometimes 3 high, segregated by gender in a lot of cases. With as many as a dozen people a cabin. Now, the conditions kind of went downhill from there. All right. The bathrooms, the heads, the latrines, whatever you want to call them, were above decks, right? And generally just an open dump down over the side of the ship. When the water was rough, they used buckets in the cabins. Right. Well, those buckets often overturn in rough water. Now, what happens when you have a chamber pot overturning? It gets pretty nasty, So they were dealing with that. And then if it was that rough, there was no fresh air down below, so seasickness ran rampant. Caroline Ohm Fryer, for example, the account that she gave my uncle Robert Fryer was that she thought she was going to die on the crossing, because she was so seasick, And and then you get clean drinking water was in short supply, so dysentery outbreaks were rampant. Food shortages. Some transit lines required self-provisioning. You bring your own food, and if you ran out, tough. And others provided just enough to keep people from starving. So it was not cruise ship conditions back then. I mean, it was pretty bad. So it was what it was. They made it, and like we were talking about earlier, the intestinal fortitude that they had to come across in those conditions no, we wouldn't be here if they didn't make it.
About what was the duration of your average voyage across the ocean?
I want to say it was somewhere in the order of 3 weeks.
About that?
I don't remember right off the top of my head. I know I did some research into that. And because these ships are only capable of a maximum speed of about 12 knots, all right, you can work out the math even on a direct line from Hamburg, Germany to, say, New York, right? It's several thousand miles. Well, 12 knots equates to roughly 18 miles an hour. Not very fast,
And
15 to 18 miles an hour. It's not very fast.
did your studies lead you to any illumination on deaths that occurred, family members experiencing death of family members on board?
Not that I recall, but I do know that deaths did happen. I mean, childbirth happened. There weren't restrictions on a woman in the 9th month of pregnancy pregnant. I mean, now you can't even get on a cruise ship if you're past 24 weeks.
My great grandmother was pregnant 8 months, if my math is right, 7 or 8 months on the voyage. But then again, that's that hardiness, that hardiness and survivability that I think won the day there. Did they stop? My understanding is that from Bremen or whatever port city what were the port cities out of northern Germany they bought their tickets at? And then did they stop in England prior to going across the ocean?
What they usually did was they would leave Bremerhaven, right, which is downstream from Hamburg, and then stop in Southampton, England, right, and then kind of the same sort of thing. The Titanic did something similar. It left Liverpool and then headed down to Southampton. I think I don't remember all that exactly, but it was Bremerhaven, Bremerhaven, across to Southampton, and then from there across the ocean. Now, people always think that, hey, they went into New York. Right? Well, that isn't necessarily the case. They went into New York, Boston, Philadelphia, even Baltimore. And I can talk in great detail about Baltimore in just a second. But Helen just posted another comment. She's talking about Salomka and Friedrichsdorf.
Yeah, that's where her family was from prior to moving to Berrien County. So just to go back on her comment, but I want to resume with another question on shipping.
Sure.
Your Berrien County German Volinians, probably you could count on a hand and a half. Most of them came from the same 8, maybe 9 colonies.
Mm-hmm.
Predominant colonies to be mentioned, well, over by Roshisha would be Zapus and other colonies around Roshisha, Breslau, but Solomka and Marcellenhof, Berestovich were the triad that I go back to, that I'm finding, I don't want to say all, but many, if not most, Volinians from Russia came to Berrien County from one of those three towns. Getting back to another question I had about that. If a person is doing a search for where your family landed in America, many people only search Ellis Island, and they assume that's the only place they could have come in from. My searches always go from Ellis Island, number 1. Okay, I can't find them. Baltimore is always my number 2. Then Quebec is my number 3. There were a good number of Berrien County Germans who perhaps the only ticket available when they got to where they bought their tickets was to Quebec. So a person has to be able to search 3. Family Search Family Search has those databases, as does the Ellis Island, and before that Castle Garden. Although that's been full, Castle Garden started or ended in 1892, and then Ellis Island started in 1892. but FamilySearch.org has all
Mhm.
those records, I believe. So,
And Helen just made another comment about the departure point. Her family went north to Riga, which is now in Latvia, then to Hull, England, which is kind of across the North Sea, and then trained to Liverpool before sailing to the U.S. Now, Hull to Liverpool, I lived in England for many years, and Hull to Liverpool is no short distance. It would be roughly the equivalent of taking a train from Chicago to Detroit, all right, all the way across the state of Michigan. And then boarding a ship in Liverpool, which was, big shipbuilding, big transit location from there to the United States. But, you mentioned the Baltimore connection there. And that, like I said, is one of the things that I am prepared to talk about if we want to. And see where that takes us.
okay, the one thing, before you get into Baltimore, one point I believe Helen taught me is the fact that many people who migrated to America, either Germans from Volhynia or Volga Germans or even Pomeranian Germans, they could get a combo ticket. That is, their ticket included not only their passage by ship, but also their rail travel to their destination. That's something that I didn't know. I believe Helen taught me that. I'm not sure.
If she didn't, I certainly did.
Oh, you may have then.
Yeah, because I think that the restriction on the onward rail travel was from port of entry to any point east of the Mississippi River.
Oh,
and that was done predominantly by Norddeutscher Lloyd steamship company.
Okay, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, and Helen said that the tickets were cheaper to Quebec or Halifax, then head towards Detroit, and you can find she's says where you can find more records about that. But what was interesting about Baltimore as a preeminent location for immigration into the United States was that what happened when immigrants came into Ellis Island. So they were taken off the boat and put straight into quarantine. All right. And that quarantine process was sometimes, weeks long, right, on Ellis Island. And of course, when you have lots of people in a small area, they start getting sick, and you get disease and pestilence, things that make you scratch your head and elsewhere, and you get outbreaks of things like typhoid fever, dysentery, typhus, all that stuff. One of the things that Baltimore had in its advantage was that with Baltimore, the immigration authorities would send medical personnel down to Norfolk, Virginia, either by train or by boat, down the Chesapeake Bay, and they would get on those ships coming into Baltimore up the Chesapeake Bay and do all the medical screening while the people were still on board the ship. And then by the time they got to Baltimore 2 or 3 days later, they already knew who was sick and who wasn't. And of course, the Chesapeake Bay under normal conditions is relatively calm. Right? You can, so most of those people would have been out in the fresh air for a day or two before they got into Baltimore. And then once they got into Baltimore, they were processed almost immediately for onward transit to trains. Right? And if I can share my screen a second for again here, you have Norddeutscher Lloyd, you have a listing, and if you look down in about lines down towards the bottom, you see Friar, Gottlieb, right, and then Caroline, and I think Olga, and one of the other daughters are listed on there, and they talk about onward travel to Benton Harbor, Michigan, and their sponsor was a person whose initials were F, or whose name was listed as F.R. Essig. Now that name should ring a bell with a lot of people in Berrien County, because you have Essex and Bainbridge, Bainbridge, Benton Harbor, and then again down south Stevensville area, who are members of both St. Matthew's and St. Paul's later on. So, but anyway, once they got into Baltimore, they ended up going through these. They were sorted into pens based on where their onward destination was, and then would get on trains from there, and then they would go, well, in Benton Harbor's case, they would end up in Niles, Michigan,
Niles,
right, at the old train station. Now, how they got from there to Berrien County, or well, Niles is in Berrien County, but how they got from there to Benton Harbor, you can speculate all you want.
I just to jump out, I've heard two different accounts. Somebody did allege that many of the Lutheran churches had their own committees who would go down and pick them up. I see no evidence of that in any of the Lutheran church minutes that I've researched. But remember, almost all these people had family here prior. So there was a rail line that did go from South Bend, then up through Niles, up to eventually Snow, Glendora, Snow, Hinchman, Baroda, St. Joseph. So they could have come by rail, or more likely a relative took a cart down there and picked them up.
Picked them up in Niles. Yeah. So, I mean, it's entirely possible. But, for the few viewers that we have or people that are joining us offline, now, just to give you a little bit of relevance to the locations we're talking about, right? There's kind of the Michigan mitten, if you will. Now, Berrien County is in the lower left-hand corner there, roughly, 150 miles west of Detroit? I forget the distance.
About that, yeah.
Yeah, it's 150 miles west of Detroit and about 90 miles east of Chicago if you go around the south end of Lake Michigan. Now, Chicago is almost straight across the lake. But that's just a reference point. Putting it a little bit more on a map, some of the places we've been talking about, you can see Benton Harbor or Stevensville. St. Joe is in between the two. You have Berrien Springs, and on all the way up to Covert, Kalamazoo, Pawpaw, all those areas. And that whole area was just was full of German farmers that came from Volhynia or other places, and settled in that area. So, anything you want to expand on there?
What I was told also is that this area was attractive because of similar climate, similar crops, and similar soil. And so, what they grew over there and knew how to grow, they could, when they got here, it was just growing, but in a different place, is what I was told.
Well, I mean, and one of the other family stories that is quite interesting is that the Friars became very good peach growers, right? And if anybody's ever heard of a Red Haven peach, right? My grandfather was one of the first farmers in Berrien County, working with the University of Michigan Extension Division to plant Red Haven peaches after they were developed.
You bring up an interesting account. I'm going to turn back the clock to pre-1900. With the market ability so available by ship across in Chicago, farmers had a place to ship their produce. When they first started doing peaches, which history around here tells us it was in Bainbridge Township, peaches became very attractive for the Chicago market, so much so that many farmers unwisely put all their eggs in the peach basket, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then in the 1880s, I want to say, then came what was called the yellows. Just about every peach tree in the county had to be cut down because of disease. It taught the resiliency of the farmers lived on as they broadened what they planted, but peaches was a very hot commodity. By the way, the peach industry did revive after that, but it took some time. And then still to this day, peaches are, I don't want to say they're common in Berrien County, but a person will still see peach orchards driving down the road.
Oh, yeah. And then the farm, the farm that's on the screen right now, my grandparents' farm, and straight north of north of the red one, that's not north, that's actually west of the Red Barn there. is all peaches. That whole orchard area there is all peaches. Red Havens and Sun Havens, Freestone and Clingstone.
Yep. Any young fellow like me likely would have spent time in an orchard with a rubber hose on the end of the stick, thinning peaches. One of the toughest jobs I had. It was like golfing, but your golf club was always up in the air, thinning peaches. Now, one interesting note that you could maybe speak of, as Germans from Volhynia settled in Berrien County, things changed around them, and they were, I don't want to say forced. When change occurred, they accommodated to change. Tell us about why that farm today doesn't look like that. One of the major changes that your farming ancestors had to contend with.
Well, I don't have all the background details on, I think health reasons were part of it. I mean, going back into the mid 1960s, my grandparents rented out the farm to the Ed Scheffler enterprise, right? And he basically, did whatever he needed to do to the farm. And then as time went on, they decided that for the many sold the entire farm to, I guess, a horse breeder of some kind. And because it was too expensive to maintain all the orchards, that person stripped everything out, put in a horse farm and an exercise ring. You probably would see it if you drove up 94, and as soon as right before you went under Park Road, you'd see it off on the right-hand side, between Boyer and Park Road. And they moved into town in Coloma. Well, so, that seemed to happen quite a bit in that entire area, with development encroaching on farmland, and other uses, because it took so long when the orchards that were planted in the 40s and 50s started reaching the end of their useful life. It was too expensive, and the time it took to get a peach orchard producing was 3 to 5 years. So if you had to start replacing your orchard, you had 3 to 5 years of nothing.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a driving force behind a lot of the original German farmers kind of getting out of the farming business. At least that's what's been my observation.
Yeah. The one thing I was hoping you would bring up, am I not mistaken? Yes or no? I-94 went through that farm.
Yeah. If you want, I can put it back up again, and I can kind of explain
this. This brings up a topic that may weave into other people's family histories. A person would say, where is my family farm? I can see it on the 1903 plat map, but I can't locate it when I'm driving around. Well, that's because I-94 went through.
Right.
When I-94 went through, it did not go according to property lines. It went through many times at a diagonal, which meant it took up the width of pretty much the good part of a farm.
Right.
And because of the buyout, the farmer had, many of them retired, and many of them gave up farming altogether.
Well, if you look at the smaller picture on the right there, where that yellow area up in the top of the screen, if you start in the upper left-hand corner of that area and go kind of diagonally above the midpoint of that photograph, is roughly the path that I-94 took through the farm. Now, the Fryer farm, the Coloma Fryer farm, was roughly 65 acres when it was first established. Now, it wasn't all bought all at once, but it was bought piecemeal and eventually was built up to 65-ish acres. And then when I-94 came through, it was cut back to somewhere between 40 and 45 acres, right? And what happened was, on the north side of I-94, it was impossible to get over there because they didn't put any way of getting there except going, up and over Park Road, Red Arrow Highway, and then back into the farm from that direction, or back the other direction to Boyer Road, and around. So it was just a severe inconvenience for them to get to that other half of the farm. So they sold it.
That answers the question many ask, or some have asked me. You sent me the plat map, but I can't locate it when I drive by. And people have to realize it may not be there anymore as a farm. Mm-hmm. And with the recent 30 years ago, recent 31 bypass, many farms were split up that way. Prior to World War II, things stuck together. Where we have the opposite problem is as a child growing up, knowing where I-94 is, I have to imagine where the person's farm was because it's no longer there. And so history, and that's painting the history with color. What must it have looked like? What were their neighbors who were unaffected? So the reverse, it plays in reverse order too.
Yeah, exactly. So
we were talking about modes of transportation. Do you know any families who settled in Berrien County, but say had relatives in Canada and exercised the option to move up there?
not that I can remember right off the top of my head. I think my family on both, both my father's side and my mother's side all pretty much stayed in that general area. I mean, my father's side, his grandmother ended up in Missouri, all right, or came from Missouri into Michigan and ended up in Jackson as a policewoman / social worker up there. Like a card-carrying member of the Women's Temperance Union.
Because the reason I bring it up is because sometimes if a person studies their family history, they'll notice that their great-grandfather came from Canada, migrated early 1890s from Volhynia to Canada, Alberta, around Edmonton, Calgary area. But many of those families afterwards, because other relatives went to Berrien County. And so there was a healthy movement back and forth. The Steinke family had Steinkes in Canada and in Berrien County. Schlender family, I'm studying the Schlender family with Gordon Shermer now, but Schlenders had family both in Canada and in Berrien County. So sometimes a person has to break out of the Berrien County mold and do some research in Canada.
Yeah. So Helen just made another observation. Is the family farm is the same story everywhere. Communities expand and build roads and more housing. The fruit belt near Niagara Falls with peaches, pears, apples, and vineyards all suffered the same fate. It just happens with the expansion of civilization.
And again, it gets us back to what's become kind of a theme of this is that compared to what these people and their their parents and grandparents and great grandparents experienced previously, to lose a farm because of economics, or lose a farm because of the yellows, peach crop failure, to lose a farm because of development, that was nothing compared to what their forefathers and mothers experienced. And that change, which our culture of Volhynian Germans endured here in Berrien County, they were prepared for it because in their DNA, they knew how to handle change. They knew how to handle disappointment. They knew how to handle despair. They could accommodate change. I think a sociologist would have a field day with that study, but I think there's something to it.
I think you're probably right. Now, one of the things that I want to kind of digress a little bit here is that you mentioned the Schlender family. Well, Daryl Schlender, who I think graduated from one of the high schools there in
St. Joe, I think.
Huh?
I think St. Joe.
St. Joe. Anyway, in the 1954, 55, 56 timeframe, somewhere thereabouts, that was a basketball player, and he wrote a book about Silver Beach, which is still available if you can find a copy of it. Yeah, that one, Silver Sands and Golden Memories. Yeah. What an interesting book.
I'm going to segue into a topic that suggests many Volhynian Germans and Pomeranian Germans. My family settled in Benton Harbor. Your family settled in and outside Benton Harbor. I'll ask it, a rhetorical question. How many Volhynian Germans settled below the bluff in St. Joe on Silver Beach? We have in our Facebook group, Southwestern Michigan Germans from Russia, there was somebody who took up the offer of his name is his name is at the tip of my tongue. He categorized by the census of 1900, 1910, 20, 30, and 40 what the address of all the Germans were who lived below the bluff in St. Joseph. The reason that's very important is because I would say a good 60% of the people that I run across around here, their ancestors lived below the bluff. They called them sand rabbits.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to ask you about that.
Even though the property is worth millions of dollars now, that was the poor. That was the like in A Wonderful Life. That was a shanty town. That was Pottersville to St. Joe back when the Germans, the place for them to buy property. Many in order to work in town, and they stayed in St. Joe, or many to be able to afford a farm outside of town. They lived down below the bluff. And on our Southwestern Michigan Germans from Russia Facebook site, people will find an entry to a link which will take you to all the addresses of people easily searchable who live down there. And the reason I bring that up is Daryl Schlender wrote the authoritative book on Silver Beach when it became an amusement area. So just a pitch for that book.
And of course, adjacent to Silver Beach is one of my favorite places.
The pier.
Yeah, the pier.
Yeah, interesting how in the early days that river didn't go out straight. It went going down river to the left.
Uh-huh.
I guess that's where the sandbars were formed and such, and then they straightened it out and built a couple of piers. I call that that's my illustration of a paradox. Two docks sticking out in the water is a paradox. One point to bring up: where did people live when they got to Berrien County? If they did not have a relative living here already on whose farm they could live while they get on their feet, or many lived with relatives in Silver Beach area down below the bluff, they really lived in either in the city of St. Joe or down below the bluff in St. Joe, or in the city of Benton Harbor, or in a location north of Benton Harbor on Pawpaw Avenue called Winans Hill, I call it a poor shanty town, but reasonable either rent or lots to buy while saving up to be able to buy a farm in Sawyer and Bridgman and Sodus or in Bainbridge Township. But many, I don't believe many came here with enough money to immediately buy a farm. They either leveraged their tenancy living with relatives on a pre-existing farm who came here earlier, or they worked in the city, as was the case for my great-grandfather, worked in the lumber mill or worked in manufacturing until he could finally afford a farm, which back then the 40 acres was $1,400 in 1899, but that took them 3, 4, 5 years to save up for. So that's where people from Berrien County, I'm speaking about the Volhynian German migrations, mostly there.
Mm-hmm. So, all right. Well, I think we've been listening to ourselves for about long enough at this point, Freddie. I think we probably ought to wrap this up. I want to give a shout out to Helen Gillespie for her contributions in the chat channel. Thank you, Helen. You've added some insight that we didn't necessarily have, or it slipped our minds to talk about. But I think we ought to let people know our email addresses so that they can contact us after the fact. So let me Let me put those up on the screen real quick.
You bet. Others may or will likely by a search or by this not fitting into their schedule watch this later. If anybody needs to have somebody do an amount of family history research or church history research in Berrien County, don't hesitate to contact me at that email address. Like I said, I do more studying of other families than I do of my own.
And in my case, I'm more than happy to look for people in my 6,000 person family tree that I've built on Ancestry.com. Just by virtue of digging and digging and digging, and at least on my father's side of the family, that history goes back to the 12th century. So. Okay, so Helen says that her mother told her that her great-grandfather sold his land in Salomka and apparently was reasonably well off before he emigrated. So not all were poor. The ship fare would have been expensive. Yes.
I would wonder if Helen's if what I said was correct, that her ancestors did not, however, buy a farm immediately, but had to save up prior to purchasing a farm. Fortunately, I have the advantage of speaking to Helen probably once every 2 or 3 weeks on historical questions. So that's one that I'm going to ask her next time I talk to her. I speak Canadian, so when I call her on the phone, she can understand me very well. She lives in Ottawa, Canada.
And we'll throw up two more little graphics here before we go. Earlier you alluded to the novel that I wrote as part of my lineage series. It's called The Germans, Lineage Series Book 6. It's available pretty much everywhere you can buy books. It may not be in bookstores, but you can certainly order it. It's also been converted to an audio book using virtual voice narration, which, by the way, does a passable job with German. And so there's several German passages in the book that work. It's entirely sent in St. Joe, Benton Harbor, Sodus, Coloma. That quadrangle there. Hopefully we'll provide some color, like Freddie said, to the very bland line by line records of marriages to
births and baptisms, yeah,
other births and baptisms, and of course Helen pokes up there, and I just have to say, seit 34 Jahren habe ich nicht sehr viel Deutsch gesprochen.
Ich war in Frankfurt am Main geboren. My dad was in.
It's been 30 or 40 years since I've spoken a lot of German. So I learned it in high school, was an exchange student, went over to Germany for about 5 weeks, and came back. This was in 1975, I think it was. So anyway, we'll wrap this up. And this has been our Let's Talk About History, the Germans of Southwestern Michigan, with a few added topics thrown in for good measure. With me today has been Freddy Krieger, historian and genealogist, and currently resident in Berrien County, Michigan. And I'm Michael Paul Hurd, author and publisher and owner of Lineage Independent Publishing in Marriottsville, Maryland, and a Berrien County native. So thanks everybody for joining us. And thanks again to Helen Gillespie for contributing to the discussion. And we will sign off. Hope you enjoyed the presentation, whether you're watching it live or whether you've watched us offline.
Thank you very much.